a civil debate. There will be a moment for question and answer at the end, so if you have something you want to say, wait till then, and you are more than welcome to say it. Professor Bowman will help moderate all of that, so you'll direct your questions, and she can help you. I'd like to start by introducing our three speakers. First, here to my right, I have Professor Josh Blackman from South Texas College of Law in Houston. Professor Blackman specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, and the intersection of law and technology. He has authored The Unprecedented Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare, as well as Unraveled Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. He was selected by Forbes magazine 30 under 30 in law and policy, has twice testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration health care, as well as many other accolades on his resume. After that, we also have Professor Bowman, who many of you know from TU. She teaches water law, natural resource energy regulation, administration law here at TU. She's a native New Mexican, was a Harry Truman Scholar at Columbia, the Barbara Jordan Scholar at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and the Oppenheimer Scholar for African Studies, as well as Hauser Scholar for Nonprofit Organizations at the Kennedy School, where she earned her doctorate. Graduating with honors at the University of Tulsa, Professor Bowman clerked for Justice Jack Hightower of the Texas Supreme Court and served as honors trial attorney in the Environmental and Natural Resources Division of the United States Department of Justice, as well as many other accolades. And last but of course not least, to my far right, we have Professor Emeritus Gary Allison, also from TU. In his 44-year career, he served the college as Vice Dean and Director of the Sustainable Energy and Resolutions Law, SERL, as we all know it. Professor Allison served as Associate Director as well on that. Professor Allison's main courses were constitutional law, water law, and taught a range of energy and environmental law courses. As well as with the other two, we have endless accolades in Professor Allison's resume as well. So please welcome them, and I hope you enjoy our debate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is my first time in Tulsa. It's a pleasure to be here. The topic today is free speech. But free speech isn't only about the First Amendment. This is a private institution. The First Amendment does not apply here. But universities exist as places of knowledge and inquiry. And when limits are placed on that inquiry, we all lose. Professors lose because we can't speak what we want to talk about, and students lose because they can't learn about what teachers want to speak about. My topic today focuses on campus free speech. And this conflict is familiar. You've had it happen here. A controversial speaker is invited to speak. Most students don't care. Some students want to hear what the speaker has to say. Others don't. And they protest and object to the speaker's presence on campus. There are different ways of protesting. You can protest outside the event, or perhaps quietly protest inside the room. Maybe some of the protesters try and do something more. Maybe they try to interrupt the speaker, to use a phrase of the day, to deplatform the speaker. Maybe the speaker responds with aggression and shouts back at the students. Or maybe the speaker tries to engage or discuss with the speakers. Maybe the speaker says, forget this, and abandons the event. Maybe the university tries to cancel the event. Maybe the administration tries putting limits on the contours of the events. Under all these circumstances, one thing is true. The speaker was not able to give the speech he was invited to give, and the students were not able to hear what the speaker wanted to talk about, and they are cheated. The protesters feel vindicated. This incident illustrates what's called the heckler's veto. The notion that people who object to speech can use heckle, scream, shouts to shut down someone else's engagement. Now, I don't come here just as someone talking about this in the abstract. This actually happened to me. In March of 2018, a little over a year ago, I was invited to speak at the CUNY Law School in Queens, New York. I'm from New York. I'm from Staten Island. I was going home. I was all excited. And they invited me to talk about, of all topics, free speech on campus. That was my topic. About 30 students actually wanted to hear me speak. The remainder of the 600 people on campus really couldn't care less. But for about 8 minutes, a handful of protesters shouted me down through constant interruptions. I couldn't speak more than a few minutes at a time, a few words at a time. Eventually, I tried to engage the students, and I diffused the tensions a little bit. I tried to find common ground. Soon enough, the protesters disbanded. I never gave the speech I wanted to give, and during my remaining time, I just answered questions. To this day, I remain conflicted about the incident at CUNY, and I'll show you a video in a minute. Because it's complicated, right? I look at this first as someone who teaches about free speech, and then I look as a guy who got protested, right? So there's a bit of a tension there. I had never been protested before, haven't protested since. Thank you, Tulsa. I was kind of expecting it today, but you did not disappoint. Thank you so much. There's another element that's worthwhile. When you have these protests, they can get dangerous. Before I gave my speech, the campus security officer asked me what my exit plan was. My what? How did I plan to leave the building? I said, Uber. He's like, okay, good, you're not taking the subway. Oh. So these sorts of protests are often peaceful, but they need not always be peaceful. But unfortunately, it worked out. Now, I am not here in a plea for sympathy. I'm a tenured law professor. I travel across the country, and I speak on, admittedly, controversial topics. I do. I think this sort of treatment comes to the territory. My goal is different, right? My goal is different to discuss how students on campus today use speech to protest speech. And specifically, how should we react to the heckler's veto? Okay? I want to cover a couple points. First, why are certain speakers invited to campus? Why am I here, right? Why did I come here from Houston? Why am I in Tulsa? Both places, right? Why am I here? Second, why do students protest certain speakers? Third, how do students protest speakers? And finally, this is the hardest question. How should the university respond to student protests? And I admit this is not an easy question because it involves the key word of discipline. Let me show you some clips. I'm not going to play the entire thing, but this is a video. It's on YouTube. It has like 30,000 views. But this is a video of my incident at CUNY. The full video is almost an hour and 20 minutes long. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to get a flavor. But here's the setup. I was invited to speak at CUNY about free speech, and then I learned the day before that there were these massive protests. I actually didn't believe them, but it happened. So this is a video of me walking down the hallway into the classroom where there were, by my count, maybe 40 or 50 people holding up signs and chanting at me, calling me a racist, a sexist, a misogynist, a transphobe, every single word in the book. I mean, everything you can think of. A fascist, a Nazi, just go down the list. They called me everything. Okay, I'll play this for a minute. A little shaky. Sorry if the camera's not the best angle.
Hey, you doing, guys?
Now, I agree with one sign. Your legal analysis is lazy and wrong. I agree with half of that. I won't tell you which half. But why are they calling me these things? Now, look, let's be frank here. I am a card-carrying member of the Federalist Society. What does that mean? Maybe you don't know. You're a 1L. The Federalist Society is a group of libertarian and conservative lawyers, and we generally hold positions that are on the right side of the spectrum. I'm actually quite libertarian myself. I don't think anything accurate they said about me, but I've taken positions. For example, DACA, the Deferred Action Policy. I've argued that it's not lawful. It's illegal. The president didn't have the power to do it. I support the Dreamers. I think there should be legislation to help them, but I think the policy was illegal. I filed briefs in various religious liberty cases on behalf of rights of free exercise. I've filed briefs for the Little Sisters of the Poor, a group that was not willing to comply with certain aspects of a contraceptive mandate. Without question, I've taken conservative views. But traditionally, when you have someone who takes views you don't agree with, the remedy is to engage them and debate them, not to deny them access. Now, I have no problem with the hallway thing, right? That's actually fine. People want to protest in the hallway and make me uncomfortable. That is their God-given right. I will not object to that, whatever. What happens next, though, is where things get a little bit dicey. Let me jump ahead. So I walk into the room, and as you can see in a second, the room is completely empty. Right? Okay, room's completely empty. There's no one there. But then the protesters come into the room, and they're standing behind me. Now, this is actually a different deal altogether, right? Now, as close as this board is to me right now, that's how far they were behind me. When someone's standing behind you, you can't see them, and you don't know what they're doing. And it's a little nerve-wracking. Now, had they just stood behind me, I don't think I would have cared that much. I mean, it's kind of annoying, but you know, they were there, fine. But they started interrupting, right? So this is the student who was hosting me.
Legal objectivity is a myth. You still have an opportunity to leave.
So thank you guys for coming.
So the guy is trying to introduce me, and they're speaking over him and interrupting him.
From the South Texas College of Law, he's here today to discuss the topic of freedom of speech in the context of university. And so, such as last everyone.
Well, thank you very much, CUNY, for having me.
CUNY is not having you. White men and those who support white supremacy.
So what's going on here, right, is they don't want me to speak. They don't even want me to engage with their fellow classmates. They're interrupting me. I got barely one sentence out. I was able to basically say a few words. Thank you for having me. That's it. Now, I chose not to scream over them. I don't think it's very effective yelling at them. My goal is to wait till they tired out. I know that sounds very silly, but I was like, okay, let them get their stuff out. Let them get their energy out. They shouldn't be doing this. They're in the wrong, but I'm going to be the bigger person and let them protest. This went on for 5 or 6 minutes, and they kept interrupting and talking over me.
So, for those of you who are actually here to hear me speak, I'll try. When I came today, there was a sign, Henry, that says, "The pressure is not welcome here." And it says at the bottom, we reject the idea that his views, my views, merit space on this campus, and reject the myth of legal objectivity. Josh Blackman is not welcome at CUNY Law. Congratulations, you made me feel not welcome, but I'm still going to say what I'd like to say. Thank you, I tried. So, I actually want to start by using the one legal argument you actually made. You said...
All right, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, because I'm somewhat short on time, but I want to jump ahead a little bit. Okay.
Support something as a matter of policy, but then find that the law doesn't permit it. And then the answer is to change the law.
Fuck the law.
You hear that? Don't tell the dean I played that, I might get in trouble. Fuck the law. So after about 7 minutes of protesting, the students were so frustrated, one student actually screamed out, "Fuck the law." Not fuck the draft, fuck the law. And at that point, I recognized that the event was taking a turn.
Fuck the law, right? That's a very good thing. You are a law school, right? And it's bizarre to say fuck the law when you're in law school.
What about the CUNY? You chose CUNY, didn't you? Because you knew what would happen if you came here.
Yeah, I'm almost done.
So fuck the law, right? That's a good.
Okay. So at a certain point, they all walked out and they all left. Okay. So now my question for you is this, and I only have about 2 minutes left, so I'll wrap up very, very quickly. What should a school do about the situation? Now, I actually give credit to CUNY, whereas I don't give credit to this school. CUNY put no limits in my speech. They didn't try to. They never once said, here's what you can and can't talk about, which I think was the right thing to do. They also actually took steps to ensure I could speak. Not well, but they did. They actually sent a dean in there to say, oh, people, stop interrupting him. But after the fact, what's the remedy, right? Should these students have been punished who interrupted me? And I think there's a couple of values here, right? If students know that they get a free pass, that they can do this, they'll do it again and again and again. There were no repercussions that happened to them. But on the flip side, on the opposite side, these students were engaging in speech by themselves. And as a First Amendment scholar, I am sympathetic. Even though they were protesting me, I am sympathetic to those who are protesting me. So I'm very cautious about imposing any sort of discipline on students who use speech to oppose speech they oppose, right? That they were using their words. Now, I think the line has to be drawn somewhere, and where I draw the line is between a demonstration and an interruption, right? You can demonstrate, you can maybe hold signs in the back, you can wait in the hallway, you can stand up and leave, you can do things to signal your dissent. But where you prevent a person from speaking, that's, I think, the line's being crossed. Now, here's the issue. What happens if you're all sitting here quietly, very nicely. What if you say, Blackman, you're a jerk, or come on, what about this? And you just shout out a question, right? Is that inappropriate? I think in circumstances that might be okay. If I'm saying something very inflammatory and someone shouts out, come on, what do you think about this or about that? That's probably okay. But this sort of sustained interruption for nearly 8 minutes of an hour-long talk, almost 10% of the time, I think goes too far. So I think here some discipline might be in order, although I'm very cautious in reaching that conclusion. Now, that doesn't mean suspension. That doesn't mean any sort of disbarment of activities. Maybe just a warning would suffice. But I think the university should take some position to signal that this is not okay and that students should allow invited speakers on campus. Okay? I think I'm out of time now. I'll stop, turn it over to my good friends and colleagues, and I welcome your questions later. Thank you all so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Right on time. I'm sorry.
So we have the same topic, obviously, since this is supposed to be quote a debate. I'm going to disappoint you, though. There's not going to be much of a conflict of ideas here. I am a card-carrying member of the American Civil Liberties Union. And if you would go look at our website and see what they say about campus speech, free speech on campus, nothing Professor Blackman said today is inconsistent with the ACLU viewpoint. But I'm going to emphasize it and to make an observation that free speech cases in the United States Supreme Court, with the possible exception of the one that said corporations have speech rights, almost always get 8-1 and 9-0 assent. So on free speech issues. Before I get into it, I want to also thank you for putting on this forum. Over my 44-year career, I must have appeared as the liberal antidote to the Federalist speaker some 24 times. You guys do it right. You don't just bring in a hired gun to say what he or she has to say. You bring somebody else in to test whether you believe that speaker had the right idea or somebody else had the right idea, or between the two speakers, they each had partial truth and we carried away some part of the truth from each of us. So some harmful speech is unprotected. It just is. You could do a whole half a semester on unprotected speech, and here are the categories: fighting words, say something in a bar that's inflammatory, the guy crashes you. Incitement to imminent lawlessness. That's where you're really calling out to a crowd in such a focused manner that it's unmistakable that you intend to incite the crowd to do a lawless act. True threats. I am going to kill you if you do that. Child pornography. The child involved in making pornography is inevitably harmed. Obscenity. Professor Blackman and I may disagree. I don't find that much harm in obscenity.
I agree.
And given what's going on in the internet, this is practically unenforceable in any event. Perjury, we all know what that is. Solicitations to commit a crime, blackmail, you can see the harm in that. Defamation, where you're harming, saying falsehoods in a public way that harms somebody's reputation. The one that's kind of weird right now and is not often listed is material aid to terrorism. And quite literally, if you put yourself in a position of trying to be an advocate for an organization our nation has labeled a terrorist organization, it's quite possible you could be prosecuted. And what I mean by an advocate, say you decided you wanted to help that organization learn how to quit fighting and to negotiate, maybe within the confines of the United Nations. You could get prosecuted for that. And I think this is not a good idea, but it's there. And I've just violated one of the rules that was supposed to happen.
Uh-oh. I won't tell.
So I'm going to rely on an old dead white guy. I apologize for that, but not really, because this guy's one of my heroes, John Stuart Mill and on liberty. I'm going to give some quotes on liberty to show what the value in general of free speech is. First, if any opinion is compelled to silence, that opinion may, for aught we know, be true. To deny this is to assume our own infallibility. Nobody's infallible, right? Secondly, though the silenced opinion may be an error, it may, and very commonly does, contain a portion of the truth. And since the general or prevailing opinion on any object is rarely or never the whole truth, it is only by the collusion of adverse opinions that the remainder of the truth has any chance of being supplied. Thirdly, even if the received opinion be not only true, but the whole truth, unless it is suffered to be and actually is vigorously and earnestly contested, it will, by most of those who receive it, be held in a manner of prejudice, with little comprehension or feeling of its rational grounds. You just learn by rote eventually. You never experience somebody getting up there and challenging something everybody knows to be true. That's why I don't mind debating climate deniers. I'm on the other side of this. Dedicating most of my retirement to fighting climate change. But I think I can beat them every time if I'm put into a forum. Fourthly, so the meaning of the doctrine itself will be in danger of being lost, or enfeebled and deprived of its vital effect on the character and conduct, the dogma becoming mere formal profession, and preventing the growth of any real or heartfelt conviction from reason or personal experience. Think of all those dreary days where tired students in the morning recite the rote the Pledge of Allegiance and they can barely understand any word of it. And after a while it becomes so meaningless to them that it hardly has any impact. So, the ACLU speech on campus, does the Constitution guarantee speakers a campus platform? So even public universities and colleges are not required to establish public forums such as opening up their facilities. But if they do, they cannot restrict who may access those forums based on the content and viewpoint of their speech. And this means that public colleges and universities may not deny students and student organizations access to their public forums because the speakers they invite and the speech they sponsor, movies, plays, music, etc., are hated or feared by faculty, other students, alumni, and the broader university community. An example, in 1989, Oklahoma State University tried to block the Student Association from showing the movie The Last Temptations of Christ. One of our fine graduates, Laura Foss, who finished first in her class, beat OSU to death in court over this. Colleges and universities cannot block or punish inflammatory speech unless it intentionally and effectively provokes a crowd to immediately carry out violent, another transgression, and unlawful action. This incitement standard is very difficult to meet, however, so it has protected all sorts of inflammatory speech that even if it tacitly endorses violence. Example, Black Panther speakers back in the day when I was growing up on campus, calling police pigs and warning that black people may start shooting back. We actually had a police officer arrest a Black Panther here at the University of Tulsa and haul him off. A very fine graduate of the University of Tulsa took the city to court and all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Which case was that?
Brown versus City of Tulsa.
Thank you.
This robust protection reflects two fundamentally important values. First, political empathy. Rhetoric meant to inspire action against unjust laws or policies is essential to democracy. The anti-war movement, Craig Bledsoe, a friend of mine, and I were talking about the anti-war movement in the 60s. People in the anti-war movement were regarded as traitors throughout most of that Vietnam War. And yet, what were they arguing? A political change. Second, people should be held accountable for their own conduct, regardless of what somebody else may have said. We should punish the people who want to do the violence, not the people who are saying inflammatory things. Have some self-control. The First Amendment does not protect fighting words, however, but this is an extremely limited exception. It applies only to intimidating speech directed at a specific individual in a face-to-face confrontation that is likely to provoke a violent reaction. However, the fighting words doctrine does not apply to speakers addressing a large crowd on a campus, no matter how much discomfort, offense, or emotional pain their speech may cause. This is the heckler's veto that Professor Blackman talked about. The First Amendment requires colleges and universities to provide protection to all speakers, even those so unpopular and hated that announcements about their scheduled appearances provoke threats of violence against the speaker, the audience, and campus facilities. So colleges and universities must do what is reasonably necessary to enable such controversial speakers to appear free from violence or censorship. Without this vital protection, government officials could use safety concerns as a smokescreen to justify shutting down speech they don't like, including speech that challenges the status quo. An example, in 2017, the University of California at Berkeley canceled a scheduled speech by Milo Yiannopoulos after a free speech protest caused over $100,000 in damages to the campus. This guy is
I think he's suing now. I'm not sure how that came through.
Making fun of feminists, gay people, political correctness. He universally gets a hated reaction from people on the left. Almost everywhere he appears, there's threats of violence. And violence indeed happened to the University of California. He was tried to come here, and the University of Tulsa wouldn't let him speak.
Shocking.
Symbols of hate are constitutionally protected if they are worn or displayed before a general audience in a public place, say in a large rally or in a public park. First Amendment protects symbolic expressions such as swastikas, burning crosses, and peace signs because it's closely akin to pure speech. The First Amendment does not protect the use of nonverbal symbols to directly threaten an individual, such as hanging a noose over their dorm room or office door. Nor does the First Amendment protect the use of nonverbal symbolism to encroach upon or desecrate private property, such as burning a cross in someone's lawn or spray painting a swastika on the wall of a synagogue or a dorm. Speech does not merit constitutional protection when it targets a particular individual for harm, such as the true threat of physical violence. And schools must take action to remedy behavior that interferes with a particular student's ability to exercise their right to participate fully in the life of the university, such as targeted harassment. The mere use of words is one element in an act of violence, harassment, intimidation, and invasion of privacy does not immunize that act from punishment. Speech codes often backfire because they allow authority figures to decide what speakers should be allowed on campus and what speech by faculty and students should be condemned and punished. They also enable students to ask college or universities to punish other students and faculty whose speech offends them. In 18 months at the University of Michigan, under a speech code, 20 white students filed charges against black students, and a black student was punished for using the term white trash in a conversation with a white student. I have two personal examples. I faced two grievance committee trials, once for allegedly advocating communism, once because my classroom discussion of the partial birth decision allegedly violated the religious rights of some students and traumatized others. My answer to that was, we're like medical students. You see horrific things. Opinions have horrific things in them. Grow up! Our schools, colleges, and universities must prepare students to combat hate and bigotry. This is the antidote. That means being an advocate. Speak out and convince others. Learn how to do that. Confronting, hearing, and countering offensive speech is an important skill and should be considered a core requirement at any school worth its salt. When schools shut down speakers who espouse bigoted views, they deprive their students of the opportunity to confront those views themselves. Silencing a bigot accomplishes nothing except turning them into a martyr for the principle of free expression. I'll close with this, that's very close to me in this area. Comes to every nation, one a nation, many moments to decide, in the strife of truth and falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, some great decision, offering each the bloom of life. And the choice goes by forever, twixt that darkness and the light. So I hope each of you today will come away vowing to seek the truth, seek the good, seek the bloom, seek the light, so you and your children can flourish. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to give Professor Blackman 5 minutes if he has
Sure.
any other remarks.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you.
And then Professor Allison, another 5 minutes, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer.
You know, one of the reasons why I love talking about free speech is that it unites people on all ends of the political spectrum. If we went to the ballot box, we would be the other column. But in this issue, I think we're like 95%, maybe 99% in overlap and agreement. By the way, I think obscenity, the doctrine's insane. What offends contemporary decency, community standards of decency? I don't know what the hell that means anymore. We have the internet, everything's garbage. Everything's bad. But I want to talk about a point that students often miss. The free speech cases from the 50s and 60s and 70s involved the civil rights movement, the Black Panthers. At the time, universities were trying to shut them down. And we can have entire dissertations on why conservative state institutions were trying to police the speech of minorities and other communities that were trying to get equality in their community. I fear we have something of a mirror image today. Today, who's asking for free speech? It's not the groups on the left, it's the groups on the right. Maybe Milo Yiannopoulos is not the best example. I'm not a fan of his. But there are conservative speakers who are being protested and shouted down. And now institutions which are not so conservative, they're more liberal, are sort of adopting the same playbook that was used to shut down left of center speech. So I'll give you an example. If I want to walk onto the OU campus in the 1950s and argue that there's a right under the Constitution to gay marriage, I probably would have marched out into the street and they would throw me off campus, right? It wouldn't have been allowed. If you tried teaching in the classroom, they probably tried to shut you down because that was not acceptable. If I try and march onto OU campus and argue that the Constitution does not protect the right to same-sex marriage, I'll probably be protested, and people try to march me as being a homophobe. Now, I don't frankly care what your position is on gay marriage. It's largely irrelevant. But where we agree entirely is that there has to be a forum for those words to be spoken. Shut them down. Tell them why they're wrong. Tell them why the 14th Amendment does or does not protect this right. But don't simply exclude the speech. And I encourage you all that whenever you say, well, this position doesn't warrant a space on campus, think of how maybe your idiosyncratic views may have been excluded from a campus decades ago in a very different political climate. I'm in for the long haul. I like speech no matter who's saying it. I don't really care what you say. I will debate you anytime, anywhere, any tweet, as it were. But I'm always down for it. That's all I have to say. Professor Allison?
So one thing I want to say is the students standing behind Professor Blackman reminded me of Trump standing behind Ms. Clinton.
Yes.
In 2016.
Yeah, good point.
I have, after watching Kamala Harris perform, I have visions of her being on that stage and turning around and slapping himself and not letting him get away with that intimidation. Afterward, the remedy, there should be a remedy. I don't know that it has to extend to expulsion, but at least ought to be rounding people up and putting them through some kind of counseling of what is or is not the appropriate way to deal with protests or things that you really dislike. The only other thing I really want to say is that what's important about being able to have free speech and talk things out is that one of the hallmarks of the coming fascist era in the 1930s was certitude on every side, with eventually the whole thing being decided in the streets, because groups couldn't get along, and the Nazis weren't the only people in the streets. They fought pitched battles with paramilitary outfits from the communists and the socialists. They just happened to win. Which either side was going to win, I think, would have produced a horrific regime in Germany. And don't hear me saying there are good people on both sides. I'm not saying this. Please don't take it that way. Those people who were in paramilitary outfits, they were not good people on either side. And so there was a recent column closed with this sentiment. The spirit of liberty is the spirit that doesn't quite know what liberty is like. And that's what I want to leave.
That's beautiful. I like that. One more time. Say the quote one more time. It's really good. The
The spirit of liberty is the spirit that does not quite know if it is right.
That's beautiful. I like that quote.
So, Professor Blackman, can you just discuss for a few minutes time, place, manner restrictions? So let's say we have a public university and there's a protest by a violent paramilitary Klan-based group. The Grand Dragon is present. There are a lot of black students on campus. The university wishes to allow the organization to exercise its free speech rights, but it's concerned about the safety of its student body. What are reasonable time, place, manner restrictions?
Sure. So the word safety is a word that's used a lot today, perhaps in contexts that aren't obvious. Now, when I think of the word safety, I think of physical violence. Are these people going to start beating people up? Are they going to start, engaging in acts of physical violence? Physical violence is not protected, and if a group is engaging or perhaps about to engage in criminal violence, I think there might be ways to shut them down. If the word safety means mental safety, that people might, for lack of a better word, be sensitive and have offense taken to the speech, then I think the university has nothing to do about that. Time, place, and manner restrictions suggest that the university or any government institution can impose restrictions on where people can speak, when they can speak, and how they can speak, so long as it's viewpoint neutral. So let's give you an easy example, right? Let's say the university says, if you want to have a protest an event in the main courtroom, you can't do it during class time. That makes sense, right? If class is in session, you don't have people in a room. So let's say all student groups can have events in these certain locations at these certain times. That's fine, I have no objection. Well, they say, well, if you're the ACLU, you can have an event at noon in the main courtroom. But if you're the Federalist Society, you have to have an event across campus in this little dinky room somewhere, right? That becomes a viewpoint restriction. So you have to be very attentive when you have these sorts of restrictions on time, place, and manner that's not a smokescreen to actually censor the speech itself. But if a group actually is engaging in physical violence, I think that's a very different story. Thank you.
I'll address that just momentarily. It reminded me of something. My good friend Greg sent me a missive about Senate Bill 361 that was enacted into law in Oklahoma, and it said that public colleges and universities, and I'm paraphrasing here, will no longer be allowed to establish free speech zones in the public spheres of their campus. I have mixed feelings about free speech zones, but in certain times and places, that may be appropriate. A good time to conduct campus classes and the like. And the kind of speech that's going to be conducted is so loud and raucous that you can't really get the job of the university done. Government should have the right to set aside the forums in a way where they can still be seen, still be heard, but maybe not in a location so close to where important learning is taking place that it's interrupted. So you might want to take a look at that. I don't know if it's going to get challenged or not, but it was an interesting way of dealing with this issue from the Oklahoma legislature and our governor.
Okay, let's take some questions. So why don't you raise your hand if you have a question and let me know who you're addressing the question to, and then I'll just call on people, you ask your question, and then our speakers can answer briefly, because we have 15 minutes, so I'd like to get at least 7 to 10 questions in. Your name?
Professor Blackman. Professor Blackman, I would like to thank you for coming here and having us speak.
Thank you.
I was the president of Young Democrats at Oklahoma State University for 1 year, so I know how important speech is in terms of getting out the full message. I also am probably one of the few people in this room who's actually had their speech altered in a way by the university.
Yeah.
It was the context in which I completely understood. It was the fact that I was putting out flyers. I wanted to put out flyers to get a stamp to get approved. And the mistake the university set, your organization not clearly disclosed those flyers in order for transparency, make it more clear. It cost me about an hour more of work. I still gave them a new flyer. It was immediately approved. Now they can plaster it like a mistake for all my flyers in the appropriate areas. So, you know, I do understand, and it's like, so I've actually had that experience to me, but I do understand that it achieves some greater good in order for the quality speech on the OSU campus. So I wanted to see what that opinion was by other organizations about restrictions like I experienced then. So I actually went on to an organization by fire that was recommended by Ken White, a legal blogger.
Yeah, good blogger.
And so I actually went and looked at that restriction. And according to them, that restriction has a yellow coat. They rank it in terms of as yellow. And then it's like, it basically means, yes, it can limit your speech, but it will be in limited portions, which I do agree with right there. But they also have another violation too, according to fire. And it was a red violation. This violation is the opposite of that equal opportunity Title IX statement, which basically means that OSU has a statutory obligation of preventing harassment and discrimination in terms of sexual bias. So this kind of really confused me. You know, Oklahoma State has a statutory obligation imposed by the federal government that's been around for a long time. It doesn't really seem to be about speech, it's about harassment, sexual harassment.
Yeah.
So, is there any distinctions we can make?
Oh boy, yeah, good question. I appreciate the question. I'm sure you all know about Title IX. Maybe Kate haven't been in Title IX. That's a very good topic to discuss. The word harassment is vague. It doesn't have any clear definition. Harassment isn't just physically perhaps touching someone. It's not even engaging in perhaps sexual banter. The universities have started to expand the word harassment in very broad ways, such that if I give a lecture on, I don't know, abortion or women's rights or anything involving sex, gender identity, whatever, pick your topic, my speech can be deemed harassing. And I think there are serious tensions between how the universities have interpreted Title IX and the First Amendment in public universities. But even on private universities, there are due process problems because they're basically punishing students according to a federal regime in manners which people have no right to counsel, they have no right to cross-examine accusers, basic tenets. And consistently, courts have held that these university proceedings are deficient on due process grounds. So I'm sympathetic, I very am, to the idea that universities should try to take care of their students and prevent some types of bad activity. But I think this has to be done within the confines of the First Amendment and the Due Process Clause. Thank you for the question. Please.
I probably depart from my liberal brethren in what I'm about to say, but I'm not a fan of disclosure laws. And a lot of people say, right now it's the corporations screaming that they're such a terrorist because of their political contributions, but I can tell you for a dead certainty, it's the working class Democratic voter who might give a few dollars to a Democratic candidate who gets the most discrimination in the workplace. And if they give even as much as $50 in some states, their name gets published. And there are employers, because I've seen it in action here, who will scour that list, and that's somebody who isn't going to get promoted. And the first pretext of firing, they get rid of them because their views are inconsistent with their employer's views. So I'm very opposed to disclosure. What I'm not opposed to is if you actually go and ask your legislator or your president or your governor to do something for you, that ought to be disclosed, because now you're asking for public laws and the like. That's where the real rubber hits the road. But just to give money to your favorite cause, and remember also the American Revolution got started through anonymous pamphleting. All those people would have been hung immediately.
You can't, Publius is a pseudonym, you can't use pseudonyms.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of that at all. Harassment's an interesting thing because one aspect of harassment that I briefly touched on in my remarks is that there have been a lot of minority students who have, let's put it this way, many minority students are going to be the first of their family ever to go to a university. I wasn't a minority student, but I certainly was the first in my family to go. You have different challenges being a first generation college attender than other people might have. It takes you some time to get adjusted. And how would you feel if there was somebody always kind of harping at you, you don't belong here, you're an affirmative action baby, you don't belong here. Harping at you. Everywhere you go, people doing some of those things. And those incidents have occurred, and it's not fair. You're taking away maybe an 18-year-old's only shot at getting ahead in life if you make them so unwelcome that they cannot concentrate and they fritz out and have to leave the school. So I'm against that, and that ought to be punished.
Okay, we have 11 minutes left. So I'm going to ask both the people asking the questions as well as my professors to keep it brief. So can you ask your question in 3 sentences or less, please?
Professor,
Yes.
we could wrap up 5 minutes early so I can say thank you to the kids.
Okay, so we have 6 minutes left. So give me 1 sentence
One
on
sentence.
your question.
One
Sir?
sentence
Yeah,
answer.
this is for both professors.
And your name is?
Spencer. Yeah, could you speak to the situation in San Francisco where the NRA was recently declared
Yeah.
a terrorist organization and your predictions on the outcome of
Okay. So briefly, the declaration that that the NRA is a terrorist doesn't have much effect by itself. But according to the city policy, local entities can't do business with the NRA. Not that they would anyway, right? But in theory at least, the San Francisco Police Department can't do an NRA shooting course, right? There might be some instances. This comes close to a boycott based on political viewpoints. I think the NRA is going to win. Again, it's in the Ninth Circuit. I make no predictions, but had this been the NAACP, had Oklahoma declared the Black Panthers a terrorist organization, right? Just use different names and the same idea. right? I think we can see how the case might turn out.
But in fact, Black Panther was declared a terrorist
They
organization, and the FBI investigated them
They were,
And killed.
and killed them.
yeah.
Sir,
Oh,
your
yes.
name?
Carter Fox, you talked a little bit about limiting public universities. Can you talk a little bit about what that can look like at a private?
I'm going to give this to Gary.
Yeah.
Professor Allison.
Right, so Professor Blackman earlier said that because private universities aren't covered, the First Amendment technically doesn't apply, and that's true. But more recently, the federal government, particularly in this administration, have been threatening withdrawal of all federal funds from private universities that don't adhere to First Amendment principles. Beyond that, the whole idea of academic freedom, in my view, also incorporates those same principles. So I think really, as a matter of practicality, private schools are subject to the same rules and should be held accountable.
Do you want to speak to the NRA, Ben?
Yeah, I'm a proud member of Moms Demand Action. I have a lot of sympathy with those who would call that organization a terrorist organization. My own group cautions not to do that. It's a Michael Bloomberg offshoot. At the same time, I have no quarrel with private individuals doing that. It may not be correct for government to do that, except that we do know that government has extraordinary powers to decide what is or is not a harmful organization. It's not just the federal government and our national security apparatus that has the opportunity to say this organization is too dangerous. If you've listened to Tulsa Gabbard describe her experience of what people look like shot by automatic weapons during the war that she participated in, and imagine you have witnessing that happening to somebody you cared about, and watch that organization not only demand that these things be made available, but everybody be allowed to carry it without any training, any permit, with any amount of ammunition clip that they want, and then you decide if they are a terrorist organization.
Okay,
I've already
I have a
decided.
moderator point, which is one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. This was true in Northern Ireland. It was also true in South Africa. So I feel, as a postmodernist, scholar of the English language, this is a really problematic term. And I think we need to unpack the black box, interrogate the term, and think about who wins when we say that, and what is the outcome of calling an organization a terrorist organization. As a general rule, I'm not a fan.
I'll note that all three of us used the word terrorist and we were not supposed to. Sorry.
We have all three
Real
violated the
quick,
restrictions
though,
placed on us by the
Where
University of
was
Tulsa.
that freedom fighter in Las Vegas and Dayton? There was none. There was just a terrorist shooting up people.
Well, there was a person with a gun who murdered innocent civilians. We don't need to call him anything other than a murderer.
Oh, no, that was a terrorist act.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I'm looking like I'm on the right of this panel
I
right
do
now.
want to specifically say thanks to all of you for coming. I want to say thank you to
Thank
each
you.
of our
Thank you
three
so much.
speakers. I want to thank
Thank
them
you.
for
That was
not
good.
only
Thank
having
you.
this debate here, but also, as they just mentioned, touched on the fact that what they're talking about was happening here at the University of Tulsa. There were restrictions placed on what these three
Which we ignored.
speak about.
Yeah.
Specifically, none of them agreed to it.
Yeah.
So that should tell you something. I appreciate y'all for being here. We do
Thank
have
you.
our first general meeting in 2 weeks from today, probably in the same room. I'll send out emails about it. Thank you all for coming. If you have any further questions, the professors will still be here for a few minutes, but I want to let everyone get to their classes.
Thank you all so much.
Hey guys, let's go outside towards the pit.
Josh.